Hello, everyone. I think that it's the fourth stream already. Maybe I'm lost the count, but I believe that it's the fourth stream where we are building a backend API for a Webflow project. And in this case, we're using Cloudflare workers for it. If you haven't checked the previous streams, go ahead and do it because we talked about why we're implementing it with Cloudflare workers, what are the benefits of it, what's the application that we're building, which is essentially just a to-do app where you can create, edit, and remove to-dos. We are building the backend, but also we are implementing that on a Webflow project so we can play around with the application. And today we are expanding, we're going more in depth into how you can implement these API in Cloudflare workers, and specifically with honojs, which is the routing framework that we use. And we're going to talk about using middleware, and hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll talk about authentication.
That's effing sweet.
So, the endpoints that we've created so far, where you can get to-dos and you can create new to-dos, are not accessible by everyone, but instead are just accessible by each user, so they can create their own to-dos and they can get their own to-dos, but nobody else can do that. It's just they are only authorized themselves. So I think that's it. I've tried to make a drawing here that summarizes what we built so far, which essentially it's just one endpoint, that it's a get endpoint, that it's just /to-dos. And this endpoint, just for development purposes, just for demonstration purposes, it returns all the to-dos from all the users. So this is one of the things that we want to improve. We want to refactor to not have showing all the to-dos from all the users, but instead just show the to-dos from a specific user. Then on the second stream, I believe that it was, we implemented a couple more endpoints. One is for getting the to-dos from a specific user, and another one is for creating new to-dos for a specific user. And for that particular case, and for demonstrating how parameters work when creating an endpoint, we just essentially define the user ID in the route as a parameter. So /to-dos /user ID as a parameter, it's expecting essentially me to fill this user ID with my user ID. Imagine that it's 1234. So then I can get all the to-dos from that user. And also when posting a new to-do here, it would be the same. If I pass 1234, I would be creating a new to-do for that user. Obviously, this is not safe because this means that everyone could just introduce the user ID. And if I knew Dimitri's user ID, if I knew Andrew's user ID, I could get all the to-dos, I could close new to-dos, I could delete to-dos, which is not ideal, right? So that's where authentication comes in, okay? But I want to break down implementing authentication in two different steps. I want first to just talk about middleware and how would that authentication work, but without worrying actually about how authentication works itself, okay? Because I don't want to confuse you yet with how a JWT token, what is a JWT token? How does the exchange work? What's in signing tokens? How does the coding tokens? All this stuff. I think that it's it can be quite verbose. It can be quite a lot of info. So that's why I want to break it down in different steps. Okay. Today I'm going to be focusing on middleware. So we are going to implement like a better version of getting and posting to-dos, but still it's not going to be fully safe because I'm not going to use JWT tokens today. But then once we understand how it works, implementing some middleware and protecting a route based on any specifics, then we can jump in and implement the final authentication with any service that we want, or we can create it ourselves. We will see. Okay. So what I want to do instead of this setup, which is the one that we have so far, I want to get rid of this. I don't want to allow people to get to-dos from any user like that, just defining it in the route, and same for creating. I don't want people to be able to create to this for any user. I just want to have an endpoint, a single endpoint that returns to-dos, but this endpoint is going to be expecting an authentication token, an authentication header. Okay, it's going to expect. Let me just edit this in here. It's returning the to-dos. So what I want to do is I don't want it to receive all the to-dos. I want to receive the user to-dos. And to be able to know to do this, I need to pass some extra information when I call this endpoint. So in this case, what I'll do is when calling the endpoint, I will pass an authentication header. Okay, and essentially this authentication header will contain information about me, about the user. Let me split it like this. So then when I call this endpoint with the authentication header, the endpoint will take that token, will decode it, will see that it is actually me. And then when returning the to-dos, will only return the to-dos from me, not from everyone, but just from me. Okay. And so this authentication header, it's going to be required. It's going to be mandatory when calling this endpoint. Okay. So also this means that we will be able to get rid of these testing just for demonstration purposes endpoint that we created. And this post endpoint, the one where we create new to-dos, also will be edited. And instead of expecting user ID, it will be the same as this one. So I will get rid of the parameter of the user ID. It will just be expecting, again, just to call to-dos, the to-dos endpoint, but with a post method. And in here, not only it will expect to receive the to-do data, the to-do that we're creating, it will also expect to receive the authentication header, like this. Okay, so essentially we'll do the same. We'll send the data, the endpoint will validate that the user is authenticated, that it's authorized to perform this action. And then I believe that the response is just the no to do, I believe, if I remember correctly. Okay, like that. Yeah. And obviously we are still pending to create more endpoints. The put endpoint or the delete endpoint for editing or deleting to-dos. We'll see if we have enough time. Let's start by talking about what's middleware and how middleware can help us implementing the checks for authentication headers. Okay, so let's go back here. And first of all, let me do some clearing. Let's remember that we had a schema for data validation. If you want to know about data validation, go ahead and check out the previous stream. We talked about this. Same for errors, more specific errors. We talked about this. This in here, it's a middleware. So you will understand today what the hell is this line that I added in the previous stream, but I didn't talk about it. Error handling, that's fine. Then also we have this endpoint just for returning simple text. These get endpoint, the one that returns all the to-dos, is the one that we want to improve and validate the authentication headers. So this one we will keep it. And then these two, the one that we have the to-dos with the user ID parameter and the post also with the user ID parameter, these ones will get rid of them. I'm not going to delete them because I'm essentially going to copy and paste what they have, but we're going to get rid of them. And this error one, I'll just get rid of it because it was for demonstration purposes. Okay. So now that we are clear, let me disable Copilot. Okay. Let's create our first middleware. Okay, so I'll do this for the sake of organization. I'll create this middleware, and let me create my first middleware. Let's say hello middleware, like that. Okay, and this is going to be a function. And because we're using TypeScript, we can access a type definition that will help us, be type safe when building this. And the type definition is a middleware handler, like this. This comes from honojs. Okay, very convenient, like that. Okay, so this middleware essentially has two arguments that I can pass in the function. One, it's the context. It's the same context that it's passed also in all the endpoints. Okay. And aside from the context, we have a next function. Okay. And inside here, I will just do this, console log, hey, and then I will await and call next like this. Okay. That's it. 2 lines of code. And I will explain this, what's going on in a second. Okay. But 2 lines of code, just a simple console log, and then a next. I call the next function. Okay. And I'll take this hello middleware, and I'll just go to the main route. Let me spin up this. Let me do pm dev. Pm dev. Let's wait for a second until it's loaded. Like that. Let me open it in the browser. So the route that we're hitting, it's the root, the base one, which is just returning some text that says hello Joel. Okay. But not only I'm gonna add this callback here in the route, I'm also gonna pass the middleware that I just created. Okay. Hello middleware, this one. And let me put it here. Hello middleware, let me import this and put a comma. Okay. And now if I call this again, look what happens. I'll refresh the endpoint. And look what happened in here. When I hit the endpoint, I got this hey console log in my console. Okay, let me do it again. Refresh. Hey again. Okay, let's do it again. Refresh. Hey again. So now every time that I'm hitting this endpoint, this middleware, it's running. Okay, it's hitting console log. So what essentially a middleware, what it's doing is it's acting as a middleware in the API, okay, in the API endpoint. When you call an endpoint, let me do some drawings super quick. But when you call an endpoint, see, this is my get endpoint like this. Essentially, you do some logic. So run my logic, run whatever, and then it returns a response, right? So from here, it will return a response. I think I'm doing pretty bad drawings, but you get what I mean, like that. A middleware essentially allows me to put anything in the middle that happens before I run my logic. And I can decide in what order I run that middleware. So the moment that I run that logic, the middleware has done anything, okay? In this case, what I've done is I've created that hello middleware, and I put it here in the middle, like this. So now this is no longer going directly to the run logic. This is passing first for the hello middleware, like this. And then from the hello middleware, I'm going to the next one, which would be run logic. So essentially, when you're calling this next function, you're just saying, hey, this middleware was finished. Just go ahead and call the next one in the line. In this case, the next one in the line, it's just the main function. But I could have more middlewares. I can create just a sequence, a queue of middlewares. So if I had hello middleware and then I had another middleware that says, I don't know, explode, then that middleware would run. And then after that, the run logic, the function itself would run. Okay. So perhaps you can already imagine how beneficial this middleware can be if we want to implement a wall for our routes. Remember that all these routes, we want to add a layer that checks for authentication headers. So if the user has authentication, then we proceed with it. But if there is no valid authentication, if the user is not authorized to call the endpoint, then that middleware can just, stop the execution, can say, hey, this is not valid. Please go ahead and provide a valid middleware. Okay. So we've created this middleware. Pretty shitty middleware because it's just console logging. Hey, okay, but let's create something more useful. Let's create another middleware. And in this case, I will call this super secret weapon, whatever. Okay, I'm really bad at names. So let me just do this like that. See next like this, okay? And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, c.set, okay? And with this c.set, I can inject a variable inside the context. Remember that the c variable here, it's the context. And this context, it's shared across all the middleware and main function executions. So if I set a variable now in here, then when I proceed to the next middleware or to the function execution, the main function, I will still have access to that variable that I've injected, okay? So if I say cset, I don't know, secret, and this secret is going to be just 1, 2, 3, 4 right now, okay? And now, let me do this and add it in here, like this, super secret weapon, like that. So now that I'm doing this, when I've run hello middleware, okay, the middleware is going to console log hey, okay, that we move to the next one. Actually, I forgot to move to the next one, like that. When I move to the next one, it's going to call this middleware. And in this middleware, I'm injecting this secret variable, okay? So now this means that at this point in here, this secret variable exists in the context. So I can just come here and say secret equals to c.get secret, like that, okay? I'm getting a squiggly line here, and it's because TypeScript doesn't know about this, but we'll fix that in a second. But now, if I just set this secret to the public, which we should not be doing if it was a secret, but if I do this and revisit it, see how I've been able to access this variable. I'm essentially just passed down from the middleware down this variable, okay? So probably you can start already guessing how we can use this with the authentication layer, okay? With authentication, what we would do, instead of passing just this secret, one of the things that we could do is, I'm just going to make up a quick middleware here, but it's going to say TK user, like that, okay? And this is going to be just, let me copy and paste all of this. Okay, and imagine that I have some logic here that check for headers, validate, token, decode. Actually, first we decode and then we validate. Decode the token, validate the token, and inject user info. Okay, so imagine that I've just done all these steps, which it's material for a whole another stream. Just imagine it. Okay, but then maybe in here, I want to set information about the user. Maybe I want to say the user ID, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 in this case, okay? This means that when I put this in here, like that, again, another middleware that it's going to be called before my main function runs. So I know that the moment that we are here, the user is authenticated, and also I have the information about the user. I've decoded the information from the user, and now I know that the user ID it's in this it's in the context. So maybe I had something like fetch to-dos from the user. So imagine that I'm fetching the to-dos here, because I could get the user ID, const user ID c.get user ID, like that. Okay. And with this user ID, I could use that to just go and to my database, query the database, and return the to-dos that belong to this user ID. So it's a way of organizing your code and making everything clear that this is accessible because you've run this logic beforehand. Okay, but let's just try it now for a second to fix this squiggly line. We would have to pass a variable type. And inside the variables type, we can define any type that it's being accessed with the set and get methods. Okay, so I'll just come here and we have the context. And for now, we've passed the bindings, but also I want to have the variables. And inside the variables, we have secret, which is a string, and also user ID, which is a string too. And now this has been fixed. If I open this, see how I'm getting secret and user ID suggestions in here. I believe that we get this JWT payload because there's a built-in middleware from Hono that it's specific for working with the JWTs. So probably that's why there's this type definition built in. Okay, so now that we know about middlewares and how we can use them to process this, okay, what I want to do is I want to edit my endpoints, and I want to do this. I want to get back to the get endpoint for all the to-dos, but I'm going to require an authentication header from it, okay? And remember that I want to do this in 2 different steps. So I want to break this down into 2 different ways of doing it. I'm going to implement it in the simple way and in the advanced way, okay? The simple way, it's not actually going to validate the token, okay? It's just going to expect an authentication header, but we were going to use that authentication header as the user ID, which means that it's not safe, but it's just for demonstration purposes, okay? Once we go in more in depth and we talk about JWTs, how we can use that to actually safely share information, parse the information from the user, then it's going to become safe. Let's go back to this in here. And I want to implement actually, let's use this one, authenticated user, okay? And from this authenticated user, I want to check for headers. So authentication header. And for now, use the token as the user ID. Okay, so I'm essentially just skipping a bunch of steps. I'm skipping the decoding and validating of the token, and instead I'm just going to assume that the token is the user ID. So what we have to do first is check for the authentication header. So inside here, let's say authentication, and we'll say c.request.header. I think that with this, we can already, it's a method that allows us to retrieve a header, I believe. Let me check that. I'm pretty sure. Context, request. I think so. It's just a request. On a request, header, this one. Gets a request header value. Yes, that's correct. So in this case, we're getting the header called authentication. Okay. And from it, we are expecting this to be something like better, where this would be the token. And in today's example, we're going to use this as the user ID. Okay. In a future example, this token, I said it before, we would treat it as a regular token, and we would have to decode it, validate it, etc. Okay. But we can expect this. So essentially now what we have to do is extract this token from the authentication header. So we'll say user ID, or user ID. It's the authentication split, and we'll split it by bearer and a space. Okay, and we'll try to get the second part. So we're splitting the string in 2 parts. The first one is what's before it, and then what's after it. And what's after it, it's the actual token. Before it, there's nothing. After it, it's the token itself. Okay? And in this case, this can be undefined because it had happened that the header, it's not there. So let's first of all throw an error here. If there's no authentication header, we'll throw a cool error. Let's remember that we had this cooler error class. If you don't know about this, let's go ahead and check out I think it was the previous stream. Pretty sure the past stream we talked about this. For the sake of sharing it between here, I'm gonna move this into another file. Quick tip for you guys, for everyone who's coding: if you are in VS Code and you hit Control and dot, you get this refactoring menu here, and you can just hit move to a new file. And now that I've done this, now I've got this extracted to a new file. All the imports are sorted for me. Everything is working still correctly, but I have it in a new file. So then I can import it from somewhere else. Actually, we're going to rename this to errors, for example, like that. So now I can say throw a cooler error, and this cooler error is going to be a 403, I believe that is. Let me check. HTTP codes. Let's go to the error ones. Unauthorized, it would be 41. So I want to throw a 41 and say missing authentication header. And I had to create a new instance of this. So essentially what I've done is in this middleware, I'm checking for the authentication header. But if there is no header, then, it's missing. So I can throw an error saying that, hey, you're not authorized. Please pass an authentication header. And then I will try to extract the user ID from it. But again, let's say that if there is no user ID, we can throw another error and say that missing. Ideally, it would be the same, right? Because it's just missing the authentication header. So let's just go ahead and do this for the sake of optimizing. And we'll say that if there is no user ID, then it's missing the authentication header, like that. Yep. Okay, cool. And now that we have the user ID, we can pass it in here, like that. So very simple middleware, simplified middleware, because I'm not checking for anything. These it's still not safe. But it's a first step to implementing like a full production-ready authentication layer. Okay. In this case, just authentication header. Let's check for it. Let's use it as a user ID. Okay. So now that if we go back to the endpoint, this to-dos endpoint, okay, if I run this, get rid of it. If I run this authenticate user before here, now I can get the user ID from it. I can say user ID, it's equals to c.get user ID, like that. Okay. And I know that this must be there, because if it's not there, the middleware will have thrown an error beforehand. Okay. It would have thrown this error for me, like that. So it's safe to assume that the user ID exists here. And now that I have the user ID, I can just copy and paste the logic that I had for retrieving all the to-dos from a specific user. So I'll just take this and paste it in here. The only difference is that we are using it. Let me get rid of this. Boom. The only difference is that we're using a prefix to go ahead and try to fetch all the to-dos that are prefixed with that user ID in the KB store. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go ahead and check out the previous streams, because I think that this is the second one where we added this prefix to identify each to-do for the user that belongs to. Okay. So that's it. Let's try to do that now. Let's see what happens if I just go ahead and try to visit to-dos here. Look what happens. I'm getting an error because I'm missing an authentication header, right? Because I've just visited the to-dos, but I haven't sent an authentication header per se, okay? So let's go to the site. Let's do it here super quick. And let's do fetch like that. Let me take this. And let me pass this, which is the endpoint. So it's going to my local machine, and it's going to /to-dos, which is the endpoint that we have. But if I do this again, I'm getting an error, right? Because I'm just calling it, but I'm not sending the authentication header. So if I check this, I'm getting an unauthorized error from here. But if I pass some headers inside it, I can say headers like this. And inside these headers, I can say authentication. And this is going to be bearer 1234. Okay, 1234 being my user ID in my case. Okay, in the future, it's going to be a token, but in this case, it's my user ID. If I do this, let me wait actually for this. the width for this, and still I have to parse it as JSON. Let's just inspect the network request. Look what I'm getting. I'm getting from it the response that contains all the to-dos that belong to this user, to the user 1, 2, 3, 4, because all these to-dos have been stored with the prefix of the 1, 2, 3, 4 user. Okay. So now what's left to do is to actually generate a random ID for everyone, right? And to do that, just for the sake of doing it quickly, I think I'm gonna do. I don't know if to do it on the front end or on the back end, but I'm thinking that let's do it on the front end for today to make it simple. Let me go back to the front end JavaScript that we did the last time. On the previous stream, we created a very simple snippet, JavaScript snippet for the front end that takes the form. When I submit the form, it takes that form, and then it sends the form data to the endpoint. Okay, it was submitting the form. We prevented everything. We got the title, and we remember that I modified this for error validation. So we got the title, we got if it was completed or not, and then we fetched the endpoint. But in this case, we have to do the same for the post. Let's do it super quick. Remember that we had this post endpoint that was expecting the user ID. Let's get rid of that. So I'm gonna get rid of the parameter, and instead I have to pass my middleware, my authenticated user middleware. And instead of getting the user ID from the parameters of the request, I'm gonna get the user ID from the context, from the variable that was set. But aside from that, perfect, that's working fine. So now I can edit this, and instead of being /todos/ a user ID, I can do this, just post it to the /todos. And in the headers, not only I have to pass the content type, because it's I'm expecting this to be application JSON, I also have to pass the authentication. Okay, and let's make it 1, 2, 3, 4, like that for now. So let's copy this and let's paste it in here. Maybe just for simplicity, let me turn this into HTML. I know it's a little bit cumbersome. It's not as cool as using the developer starter template, because you get hard reloading from scratch. I'm doing publicity now. I'm doing some marketing of the template. But go ahead and check it out if you want to have some hard reloading, live reloading, sorry. It's very simple to use and powerful. Okay, but if I do this, now my script is running. Okay, I've added this script to the body of the page. So when I submit the form, it's going to get this data and send it out to the endpoint. Okay, so let's do it. But before, let me log into Cloudflare. Okay, so I have these to-dos. Zoom in a little bit. So let's create a new one. Let's say they should be working. Make market is completed. Unauthorized, but I think I passed. Oh, right. Look what happened. I'm missing the better keyword. Maybe some of you have questions about why the hell are we using this better here. This is because there are many different ways of passing authentication tokens. Better is one of them, but I know that there are others which I don't know of. So this is as far as I can tell you, that the better is used because it's a method of passing tokens, and there are other methods. But at this moment I cannot tell you exactly what are the other methods. But yeah, just for you to know this. Okay, second, let's update this in here. Not very convenient, but just a second. Press this. They should now be working. Mark is completed, and I'll submit this, and it was correctly submitted. See, okay. So if we go back to Cloudflare, now, now these to-dos should be created. They should be now working. Okay, so we've been able to now create the to-dos. Before leaving, I want to do something that I've been meaning to do since the first stream, since I presented this very simple way of creating user IDs. I want to, in here in the front end, I want to generate my user ID. And I'll just use a random random user ID, I think it is. Let me see if it's actually available in Chrome. One second. Yeah, it is. So there's actually a built-in function for generating user IDs. I don't know if you knew about this, but it's built in most of the major vendors. So it's convenient. So I'm just gonna generate a user ID like this, but I'm only gonna do it if I haven't done it before, because we create another function just for a second. And this function will say get user ID. And from the get user ID, what I'll do is check for my local storage. Okay, so maybe I've generated a user ID in the past, and when I generate the user ID, I will store it in the local storage. So then if that user ID exists, I can retrieve it. So my browser remembers that I'm that user who was creating the to-dos. Okay, remember that all of this is just for learning. It's not the best way of doing it. Once we went with a regular authentication layer where we log in and we have our own access token with our own real user ID, then this is not necessary. But I want to do this just for the sake of convenience. So I'll say let user ID or stored user ID, and I'll go to the local storage and I'll try to get item my user ID. Okay, if there is stored user ID, I can just return it. But if there's no stored user ID, then I will create a new user ID with the crypto random UUID. I will store it local storage.set item and user ID, and also I will return it user ID like that. So now this user ID, we can get user ID like this. And this user ID, it's what I'm passing here in the authentication. So I'm going to say this user ID. Okay, so just a quick recap. I've generated a user ID, and now this user ID is what I'm using to remember me and to create new to-dos and to get my to-dos. Okay, so if I do this and we go here, home, and we paste this in here, now every time that I create a new to-dos, they should be, oh wait, oh long, yeah, set item, I have to pass the user ID. Sorry, set it again. Okay, let me check this for a second. Local storage. We've got a user ID that's been generated. So now we can create a new one, new to do. Let's submit this. Let's inspect the network requests and see how it was created. So let's go to Cloudflare. And that to do should have been created with my prefix, which is the randomly generated user ID. Let's wait for a second. And this is the one new to do in here. Okay, so the last thing that would be missing from here is loading all my to-dos when the page loads. So I'll just come here in the front end and also do an additional function that says load to-dos. Okay, and this is going to be a sync, and it will do response await fetch, and I will fetch from here. Okay, and I'm going to pass the authentication took the authentication header, this one, only the authentication header with my user ID. Okay. And this user ID should actually be passed here, user ID, like that. And the response, let's pass the data, await response.json. I'm not doing any error validation here, so stay with me. I'm doing this for the sake of going fast. But essentially, just for the sake of organizing, keeping things organized, I'm going to move the post to-dos or form submissions, handle form submissions in another. Well, it's already here. Anyways, I don't want to confuse you guys. I know I'm doing a lot of stuff before ending. Let's just keep this simple. Load to-dos. Okay, so when we load the page, I'm going to load the to-dos like this, and I'll pass the user ID. And then once it's finished, I'll just console log the to-dos like that. Okay. Quick recap. When the page loads, I'm loading the to-dos, passing my user ID. Okay. And then also I'm adding the submit event listener. So when I submit the form, I'm also getting some to-dos. I'm creating the to-do, sorry. So let's just go here. Okay, well, see, if I refresh the page now, I'm getting these to-dos that are being loaded and only my to-dos. So new to-do is the one. Let's create another one. Hey, Keegan, let me submit this. It's been submitted. You don't see anything because there's no JavaScript processing it. But if I refresh the page, so let's do another one just for testing. Let's say, I don't know, Chavi, I'm going to answer you in a second. Let's wait until this has been posted. Yeah. Let's console log again. Okay. So you can see how it's kind of working correctly. Okay. It's not pretty, but it's working correctly. Page loads. We've got our user ID. We load the to-dos, passing our user ID as the authentication header, just as a temporary solution until we have a better authentication workflow in place. Then when we post the to-dos, we also pass that header with the user ID. So then the endpoint, the API, is able to identify us as users. So when returning the to-dos, only loads the to-dos that are from us. And when creating to-dos, creates a to-do under our domain. So under the user ID. Okay. Simple enough, but I think that it should be descriptive enough for everyone to understand the workflow. At the stream today, so far what we've done is we've implemented a very simple, for demonstration purposes, authentication layer on top of the get to-dos and post to-dos endpoints. We've demonstrated how to use middleware. Using that, checking for authentication headers, making sure that the user ID is recognized, and then using that user ID for retrieving or creating new data. Okay? In the next stream, we're going to move a step further, and instead of doing these kind of simple mock authentication layer, we're going to use a real service. And I've been getting some suggestions here in the comments, and we're gonna go with Auth0. Auth0, real authentication as a service, which will help us implement this final layer that is production ready for any kind of application. So hope to see you there on the next stream. If you like this content, leave a like, comment anything. We'll see it, or we see it. See you in the next one. Thank you.